I boxed up the few items I wanted to keep from my storage unit, and Greyhound picked them up for their new life in my little house. Not so fast. Stories can be tidied up, but not reality. That's what I discovered. I was finished with my storage unit, but my stuff was not going to let me go. It was not going to let me drive off into the sunset, all happy-chappy, thrilled with my life. Alas. So what happened? That's my story today. You're not going to believe this. Well, you might, but it's kind of out there, literally. Hi there, I'm Judith, and that's Brecky right behind me. I started this channel because I own a little house, and I love to talk about it. If you've seen my video about saying goodbye to my storage unit and how I handled it, I bet you thought that was going to be the last of that storage unit and its forgettable contents. But nope, I wasn't quite done. There was one more issue I had to attend to. And this one really made me tear out my hair. You see, I still had the few precious items I had put aside into boxes. There were 5, 6, 7 boxes. I can't remember exactly. I had to get those to my new home. Before I get into that terminally, though, I keep forgetting to ask people to subscribe. Please subscribe. And let me know if my stories are your thing by leaving me a like. That would be really helpful. Back to the story. There I was at my storage unit, 2 days before I was set to fly back to the East Coast. As you know from my storage unit video, I had gone through a whole process in my head of trying to go through my stuff, the contents of that storage unit, and I was in the middle of making final decisions at that point about what to do with it all. At the same time, I had taken out a few things that I was going to ship by Greyhound back to the East Coast. If you remember, I did all kinds of research. That would be totally me. And I actually had about 8 different options. But I'm a gal on a budget. And I had decided, well, I didn't need to keep that much stuff. And it was really cheap to ship it by Greyhound. What they would do is take your boxes, your luggage, whatever you had, and you'd pay for them to put it in whatever buses were coming in this direction that had space underneath where everyone else's luggage goes. So that was my plan. Earlier in the week, I had had to submit measurements to Greyhound about the boxes I was packing. In fact, I had almost finished packing them. I could just measure them right up. So I paid my money, I sent them the measurements, and I got all the receipts back, neat and tidy in the email. And then they told me what time they would come and pick up my items. You see, the arrangement was, and this was one reason why Greyhound was such an attractive option, you could pay a little extra and they'd actually come and pick up your stuff. So they were going to come to my storage area and get those boxes. So yes, they wanted the measurements. I duly sent them in. They wanted payment. I sent that too. And maybe it was $100 extra for their white glove service, that's what they called it, to come get the stuff. So I didn't have to take it down to the bus station, find parking, lug one box after another in a not so attractive neighborhood. Anyway, I didn't want to go through all of that. So here we were. The arrangement was 10 o'clock in the morning, 2 days before I was set to fly back. 10 o'clock, I'm sure this comes as no surprise to you, came and went. By 11, I called to ask where they were. And what did they say? Oh, 10 o'clock? That means sometime between 10 and 2. For sure they'll be there by 2. And what do you think happened at 2? Well, you know the answer. They weren't there at 2. So I called again. What did they say this time? You have to remeasure the boxes and tell us what you have. And then we'll have an answer for you tomorrow about what time we'll be there. You see, our office is closing. We're on the East Coast, and it's after 5 o'clock right now. We'll be back at our desks tomorrow, and then we'll come up with the time. You know I was screaming bloody hell inside, and I was pulling out my hair. I was having to figure out what to do with all my other stuff, the stuff I wasn't sending back east. And here Greyhound had thrown me into another pile of crazy mess that I had to deal with. And I had thought this was the one piece in the whole process that was already settled. But there was nothing I could do about it. Don't you hate that when you make plans and you have your deadlines all figured out and it's all going to work? And then there's some kind of massive glitch and it doesn't go according to plan and you're already stressed out and your plane is going to be leaving and you have to be away. For me, that's all very difficult. I was rapidly becoming hysterical, but I couldn't do anything until the next morning, evidently. Greyhound's offices were closed. So at the new appointed time, 10 o'clock, the morning of the next day, one day before I'm set to fly back east, 10 o'clock came, yes, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I call to find out where they are, and they say, you know what they say, right? Well, 10 o'clock means between 10 and 2. Okay. 2 o'clock came. Where are these people? I called again. They were not on their way. They didn't have a truck to pick up my stuff. They had no way to get it. I told them to hurry up and get there because I had to leave. Finally, the Greyhound manager came. He had had to go to U-Haul to rent a U-Haul to get my stuff. Did he also rent a dolly? No. And that created an additional problem. One of my boxes was a bit heavy and maybe a bit bulky, so it was awkward. But I didn't have anything over 50 pounds. So he loaded in the U-Haul. At that point, I was not going to be helpful. I couldn't get rid of them fast enough. And so I was finally on the road. My stuff safely sent Greyhound's way, and I tooled back up the interstate in the direction of the airport where I was supposed to leave the next day. All was well, yes? No. I kind of calculated how long it would take Greyhound to drive from the West Coast to the East Coast. And they'd be driving something like 24/7, maybe 20, let's give them 20 hours a day, 4 hours for stuff sitting around while it was waiting for transfer. And I did guess about right. Maybe 6, 7 days later, I got a call from the local Greyhound office here. They said, your stuff is here. I said, fabulous. They said, pick it up within 5 days. I said, okay, I can do that. So I organized a couple of guys from work, lovely guys. I have lovely people I work with. Anyway, a couple of lovely guys volunteered to help me get the stuff. We were working that day and the next, but we did it after work. So we head over to the Greyhound station. It's just a couple miles from here. And it's 20 below. Absolutely frigid. It does get to 20 below most every winter here, and those were the days. So it's a little bit nippy. We aren't in shirt sleeves at that point. And I go into the office and I say, here I am. I need my stuff. Here's my receipt. Here are the boxes. Here are the pieces. She said, oh, okay. I said, yes. Where are they? I expected her to go in the back and retrieve them out of storage. I was fairly certain hers was the next move, and she was to look at my receipt, see the tag numbers, go in the back, get my pieces. My fellows would load them up, and off we'd go. But is that what happened? Of course not. I must have said something about you're getting them from storage, and she said, oh no, we don't have a storage area here. It's true this office was in the middle of a Chinese restaurant, but that's beside the point here. She said, we don't have room to keep things. I said, what do you mean? You told me I had 5 days to pick it up. Where is it? She said, out on the dock. And I thought, on the dock, what does that mean? I must have kind of looked at her and she said, outside. And I thought, you can't be serious. Outside? I looked at her again. I said, in storage, yes? Thinking, If it's outside, at least she's going to get a bunch of keys and open a cage for me. But no, outside. I went outside the door where the buses load and unload. And you know how it is when you've been on a bus or when you're getting on a bus? The driver handles the bags and suitcases. They get shoved into the cargo bay and they get hauled out of cargo bays and plopped by the side of the bus. That's where my stuff was. When the clerk said my stuff was outside on the dock, that was exactly where it was, where those bus drivers load and unload. And at that point, it had been out there for several days. No security. It might as well have been sitting out somewhere on a curb. Public coming and going. No one would have noticed if my boxes had been hauled off. Thankfully, they were all there. And they're all there at 20 below. What can you say? I did what I normally do. I wrote a letter to the president of Greyhound, excoriating him and his company for putting me through this. They refunded all my money, every penny. I really appreciated that in the end. I'm not sure every company would do that. They could have just told me to go to hell. I would have screamed louder, but yeah, they could have told me that. But no sweat, they refunded the entire amount. So in the end, I didn't have to pay for any of that stuff to come back east. But I will tell you, and this has been the truth of all my downsizing, those 5 boxes, the stuff in those 5 boxes, which I had thought was so valuable in the moment, within a year, none of the contents was in my house. They didn't belong in my new little life. They belonged to my past, and they didn't fit here. So I let them go too. In the end, I guess part of the moral of this story is that items can seem incredibly valuable in a moment. You can expend an enormous amount of effort hanging on to them, and you can blink, and in the next moment, you have no need for them. You can easily let them go. I've been amazed how that process has worked for me. I'll have more stories about that in the future, but I bet you have stories about downsizing too, and about storage areas, how you felt about your stuff, and the complications of letting it go. Put your stories in the comments. Everyone loves a good story. And just a reminder to hit that subscribe button so you can hear more of them. And I always appreciate a like. It kind of tells me how to steer the channel. That's it from me for now. But we'll talk soon, all right? See you then.